Welcome, everyone, to another Monday, another edition of Ask Mike. It's been a while since I've been up on this desk, and there was a lot happened. I was in isolation for a week, and all of a sudden, the Hogs just start turning everything on.
Stay at home.
I know, the big win over Missouri, huge win over LSU. We're going to talk about basketball, football, and a lot of people talking about Bud Walton Arena this week. Mike, let's start off with the biggest stories. Our first question this week comes from Mousetown on Twitter. He asks, how do you explain this turnaround by the basketball team? Comparing to how they played at A&M and how they competed at LSU, it makes no sense. Do you think, what's the difference?
Well, it kind of makes sense. It's Musselman's sort of thing. We talked about this earlier, the fact that when his first year here, they hit the skids late January and had this big losing streak, and everybody thought, oh, the world's coming to an end. They bounced back and were looking pretty good before COVID. A lot of people felt like they would get into the NCAA tournament. We didn't have the tournament that year, but a real turnaround. And then last year they kind of struggled out of the gate and then came back and had a great run all the way through the rest of January, February, March, and into April. So this year is kind of the same thing, starting slow out of the gate. And I think what this says to you is that Eric Musselman and his staff, just because you think they're not doing anything doesn't mean they're not behind the scenes pushing buttons trying to figure out what to do. And I think he just tried a lot of different things, and what really appeared to happen was that he finally decided, look, I'm going to go with a bigger lineup. And when he put that bigger lineup in against Missouri, they just broke out of the gate strong. Other people seemed to play better with that lineup, and the lineup featured, instead of maybe 3 guards and 2 forwards, you ended up with the other way around. Jalen Williams seemed to benefit from that, I thought.
Double-double.
Yeah, and then J.D. Notae seemed to benefit from it. Now, you can sit here and argue about why. To me, if you're going with a bigger lineup, obviously you give Jalen Williams more help inside. Maybe you're drawing your defense back a little bit, which opens things up more for Notae. Maybe you're having to respect those bigger players a little more so Notae can penetrate in and he's got people to dish to or he can score. I think in the end, what it did was create more confidence, and I do think some of that was psychological. Some of the problems they were having was just psychological. When you've got as many new guys on the team and they're all trying to fit in and figure out what they're going to do, and then all of a sudden it's not working, they start questioning themselves. Everybody's questioning everybody, and sports is a funny thing. It's not hard to figure out. I think ego is a big part of succeeding in sports. Now, that doesn't mean you walk around thinking you can't, nobody's better than you, but I would rather take a team full of players that have a bit of an ego than players that have no ego. And I think maybe their ego had been damaged a little bit. And so you get players with a little bit of ego again. They believe in themselves. They're feeling better. The biggest difference, though, has been defense. That was the amazing turnaround. When they held Missouri to 15 points in the first half, I'm going, okay, now you're doing something. Now you're really doing something. I mean, those guys didn't score a field goal. I think they had 1 field goal going into the last 3 or 4 minutes of the half and finally got another one. So it's like 2 in the half. But even more amazing than that was what happened at LSU. LSU scored 9 points. LSU scored 2 points in the last 9 minutes of the game. Let that sink in. LSU's good. They've got a good offensive basketball team. They were averaging 76 points a game, ranked 11th in the country, I think 12-2 overall.
They're at home.
They're at home. And you're going to hold, they've suddenly gotten an 8-point lead where it's been fairly close. And I told Alyssa, we're watching the game, I said, this is where they pull away. And it was just the total opposite of that. 9 minutes. That's almost half of a half where you scored 2 points. Can you imagine if you're an LSU fan watching that, what that was like? They got to be going, what is going on out here? So to really watch a team that could play no interior defense, nothing on the 3-point line. They just looked totally confused to now a team that's suddenly playing harder. And I mean, I've seen things that I still have a hard time believing. I've seen Chris Likes block a shot under the basket.
He did. It was his first block of the season.
He did. And then another time, a 6'5", 6'6" guy tried to post up on him and do a little turnaround thing, and he did not back. It's one of those things where bump, bump, bump. I'm going to bump you closer to the basket. He didn't move. was like boing,
rock
boing,
solid.
boing, and then the guy turns around, shoots, and misses. So the exciting thing is, here's a team that was 0-3 in the SEC, and I was saying on the show, they may not make the NCAA tournament. They could finish near the bottom of the SEC. Well, now they're 2-3. They've got 2 games at home this week against 2 teams they could beat. It's not impossible. If they keep playing like the way they've been playing, they will definitely win these 2 games at home. And then you go on the road to Ole Miss. Okay, any road game is tough, but I mean, I'd rather go to Ole Miss than Auburn.
Right now, yeah.
And then go to Georgia is the one place you'd say, yeah, you can probably win a road game at Georgia. So they possibly can end up 6-3 after this stretch after starting off 0-3. So that's got everybody excited. And it's really just kind of hard to believe, because I'd reached a point before all this happened where I kind of thought, I'm not sure they've even got the talent. I mean, he may have brought in a bunch of guys that could score, but I don't know if these guys can play defense. And all it took was just a few changes and some confidence and guys playing harder, and then we see this is not a bad basketball team at all. In fact, it's a pretty good basketball team. Will Wade said after the game, hey, I don't care what people say, they're good.
Yeah, they proved it there, beating 12th ranked LSU. And the big change we haven't touched on yet was what Razorback Redneck asked right here. This was a great win against LSU, and kudos to Keith Smart for the coaching job he did filling in for Coach Muss. But I hope we don't get a lot of yahoos saying we should trade Muss for Smart. Kudos to Smart getting a win in his hometown of Baton Rouge, though.
Yeah, you might have gotten some of that if they hadn't beaten Missouri. If they'd lost to Missouri and then go down and beat LSU, then people are going, well, what's going on here? Maybe we need this other guy to be the head coach. But the improvement had started before they ever left. And plus, we knew pretty much what the dynamics were, because Keith Smart said what was going on, that he was, staying in constant contact with Coach Musselman during the day. They were texting back and forth. He knew what they needed to do in practice. The game plan didn't change. What Muss was going to do, Keith Smart did. The only difference was he told me when it comes time to manage the game, that's where you're on your own. You need to do what you think you should do. We'll do my game plan coming in, and we won't change things for the players. And the players said nothing really changed. It was like he wasn't there, or it was like he was still there. But when the game started, then I think you saw Keith Smart sort of coach his coaching style. And it's a little bit different. I was watching him. He likes to, and I'm not a fan of this, but he likes to talk to players while they're out on the court. And sometimes a player can be looking over at a coach and get distracted. I can't remember who it was. One of those players had a defensive guy just blow right by him while he was kind of looking over there. So there was a little bit of difference there, but it was a lot of fun watching him. And I guess now, I don't know what his future's like. I don't know if he goes, hey, maybe I should be a head coach now after I've done this. He's still got at least another game to coach, I think.
He's going to coach against South Carolina.
So we'll see what he does in that game. But if he goes 2-0 and I don't know, people have called him an interim head coach. Isn't an interim guy somebody that takes over after you fired the coach?
In a scenario, yeah. I think it's just any fill-in.
I would call him an acting head coach. I would call him
I guess you could call him that too.
Or a fill-in head coach or so. I don't know about interim, because to me, we've had a lot of interim coaches over the years in different sports.
That word just doesn't sit well.
And that's usually when the guy's been fired, and Musselman clearly has not been fired.
Well, it's always good when you have your backup coach, we'll call him a backup coach, also have an NBA head coaching background. So.
And he had done a lot of, he had been an interim coach, and he coached a lot in the NBA where coaches had been fired. So
he knows the business.
He wasn't in an unusual situation for himself.
Well, let's keep on this Eric Musselman train. T. Modis says on Hogville, it seems like Eric Musselman is not taking enough responsibility for the team's recent losses when there are clearly coaching flaws, including lineups, rotations, refusal to call timeouts when getting buried, and sitting centers, and then getting out rebounded the whole half. That's a big take there by Modis. What do you think?
Well, that question was posted before the turnaround. And I didn't put it in here to embarrass Team Otis. I put it in for a couple of reasons. Just to demonstrate once again how quickly things can turn around. You can think something one day, and it can be totally different the next day, and I'm as guilty of that as anybody. So I just put it in there to sort of dramatically show the difference in what things were before this turnaround and what they are now. You can think that a guy's not doing things to solve problems, but we're not there. We're not there when they practice every day. We don't know what buttons were being pushed. We don't know what different things were being tried. We're not sure. We can think we know why Connor Vanover didn't play much, but maybe we don't really know because we're not watching practice every day. So a lot of the criticisms he mentioned, they kind of ring true when you're losing basketball games, but then when you suddenly have a turnaround like this, it doesn't, all of a sudden you're going, that doesn't make much sense.
I remember Musselman saying earlier last week that his staff was in every night, Sunday nights. They'd go back into the office, work late into the night to figure out a solution. Maybe those things are starting to pay off. So it's a lot of behind the scenes
asked me last
stuff.
week, what's wrong? And I said, I don't know. I don't get paid to figure that out. Don't put that on me. He's got to solve the problem, and he did.
Eddie Lynn says, it was fun to watch Will Wade boil over during the game. He looked like a little kid who got his popsicle taken away. A little temper tantrum.
I don't know if you saw this on Twitter. Alyssa showed it to me. There was a guy, very creative, who took these clips of Will Wade during the game where he's yelling stuff. And this guy must have been a lip reader because then he got like a little girl's or maybe a little kid's voice and had that person say what Will Wade was saying, but in this little kid's voice. It was.
I've seen those they call it bad lip reading, where they just are totally random things, but it makes sense.
Maybe there's a program that you can do that does that. I don't know. But anyway, it was really funny. I will say this. I think Razorback fans don't like him because he's a cheater, and we all know that, because he was caught on a wiretap. This isn't speculation. If you're on an FBI wiretap saying you bought players, but I will say this, doesn't the fact that he still has his job like 2-3 years after that, doesn't that say more about LSU's administration than it does him? That they didn't do anything? They just went, okay, whatever.
Win some games and you'll be all right.
Now that everybody's making money anyway, is that even going to be an issue anymore? Will it just completely go away? So, I don't know. He got away with it. I think Razorback fans don't like him because of that. But I will say this. He had some very, very good things to say about Arkansas after that game. He didn't do one of those things where we screwed up, we didn't do this right, that's wrong, this is wrong, and just ignore the team that beat him. He made it pretty clear to his own media that they had just been beaten by a very good basketball team that was coached well and played well. So
there you go.
There's that.
Hey, as long as you see him boil over, you beat the 12th ranked team in the nation. I got to go watch that Will Wade video. You got to show it to me after this.
Alyssa can show it to you. She knows where it is.
All right. Wood says on Hogville, at the end of every year, season ticket holders are given an end of the season survey. A great number of us consistently say, ditch the DJ and the piped music. We want some more of the band and cheerleaders, yet we seem to be ignored. This Jeff Long effect is killing the environment at Razorback events. Now, I know you're usually in here watching some games, but you have a take on this.
Well, I mean, I just hear it from a lot of fans. Look, I've done this for 46 years. I know a lot of Razorback fans, and I know a lot of them I don't know still come up to me and talk to me if I'm in Walmart, the bank, restaurant, wherever.
You can't get away from it.
And I've been hearing this for a while, and this is not just a current thing. This is because, and the reference to Jeff Long is appropriate because this really all started under him. Because what he did when he came in as AD is he took an environment that had been sort of created first under Eddie Sutton in Barnhill and then carried over with Nolan when he came to Bud Walton. You can go over to Bud Walton in that area where they have the trophies. There's a glass sort of, I don't know what it is, bowl or something, and it's made of crystal, and they had that the night of the last game in Barnhill. And they opened it up. It's got a thing where you can open it up. And the idea was they were going to take the spirit of Barnhill, put it in there, and then take it over to Bud Walton, because a lot of people were worried that when you went away from Barnhill with its cozy 9,000 seats and went to this gigantic 19,000 seat arena, you would end up with something that was not what it was. So the idea was, It's just a bigger place. We're still going to have the same spirit. And I think everybody in the athletic department worked really hard to make sure they didn't lose that sort of atmosphere that was created at Barnhill all those years. And in the early years under Nolan, it helped that they were winning big. But the band was a much bigger part of what went on. And the main thing was, if I can look at the difference between what I see right now and what was going on back then. Back then, the idea was that when there was a timeout, you had to figure out a way to keep the fans into the game so that it didn't help the other team. You know, Arkansas goes on a 10-0 run. Opposing coach calls timeout. Part of the reason they do that is to get the crowd back down a little bit, because everybody's going to sit there for a while, and it's going to kill all that noise. Well, they had a lot of things that they did back then with the band and the trumpets running around and different things. They had Jim Robkin who went around going crazy. And it kept people at a fever pitch. The idea was we don't want anybody sitting down. So you just run up in front of a guy sitting and just stare at him until everyone laughed and he got up. So you had everybody standing up. They're all going crazy through the entire timeout. And when the timeout is over, the other team comes back on. It's like nothing changed. It's like it was before they called timeout. Well, now it's almost like Jeff Long's people said, well, and I think a lot of people at NBA teams, anybody in charge of a basketball venue, I think what they're thinking is, okay, this timeout is like the game's not on right now. It's not happening. So this is a dead period, and we can't let people not be entertained. So let's have these special things that we do: Whataburger, French fries contest,
throw some T-shirts,
throw T-shirts, have the disc jockey and have an announcer going around yelling stuff and getting everybody excited. So the idea is you're entertaining the fans so they don't get bored. And what a lot of these people have told me is, they don't have to entertain me. I want to be entertained by winning a game. The game itself entertains me. I don't have to have extra things like all this other stuff. So that's what some of these people are saying. This is why they're upset.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not spending X amount of dollars to try and get on a Kiss Cam or whatever the heck promotions that they're doing
that's
anymore.
Done in a lot of places.
All right, Mark Anderson wants to know who is making all these decisions at Bud Walton. Every time I go there, there is some new dumb thing. The Bud used to be unique and feared, and now all we do is just the same hokey things like everyone else does. Video game sounds, a DJ, some guy screaming at us on the microphone. It's embarrassing. But Jason tweets, now it's like that everywhere. Even Cameron Indoor, which is considered one of the best venues in college basketball at Duke, has a DJ and announcer walking around. So it seems like we have some differing opinions on what's going on at the Bud.
Absolutely. I don't want to give the impression that everybody's against what's going on right now. And it is very common. I mean, if they're doing it at Duke, and Duke's a very traditional school, that you wouldn't think Duke would do something really dopey. It's just, this to me is a difference, a clash of fans who expect different things. And I'm not saying one is right, one is wrong, but there are definitely, you know, again, you have to ask yourself what happens when they do these surveys. I don't know. I don't guess they'll show them to us, but it would be interesting to see what the balance is.
Well, I think it's also the dichotomy of fan, and we'll get to that because I know there's a little something there. Aaron Jones says, I wish the band still played. Watching on TV, you never hear them. I heard the fight song a total of 0 times the other night. Had to text my friend at the game if the band was even attending. Atmosphere, regardless of team, 10,000 times better in the 90s.
You got a little
people are upset on Twitter.
10,000 times better, but the band is still there. They still play. They just don't play as much. And I think, again, one of the things that people have said to me is this is a college campus, and it's about college students. And I would much rather watch a college band with college students on scholarships, you know, in a band. I guess they're on scholarships, I don't know, but they're in a band, rather than listening to piped-in music. That's what they tell me. But that's some people, I'm pretty sure not everybody feels that way.
Yeah, and a lot of people watching the game might not be Arkansas fans if you're on ESPN2 or something, so why not show the craziest fan just cheering his face off, you know? That might be also part of those broadcast things. All right, Not everyone agrees with this, though. Nate tweeted out this reaction to the complaints from all of this at Bud Walton Arena on Twitter. He says, "Old man yelling at clouds." 5 words there.
Yeah,
sums it up what we were going to.
It's kind of a thing you see on the internet when people start complaining and the perception is that they're old, that they're just, get off my lawn, I'm on my front porch, stay off my property.
I want to keep it the way it always was.
What I would be, and I made a reference earlier to this survey that, what was his name?
Wood.
Whatever he said about this survey, I assume he's a season ticket holder, that they get this survey and they fill it out and send it back in. Well, it would be interesting to see what the breakdown here on the complaints is. Is it just people 50 and older? Is it 45 and older? Is it 60 and older? Is it just people that remember Barnhill? I mean, I don't know. This is a very controversial subject, and I would like to be able to give some better information on how this breaks down. You know, people in their 20s and 30s think it's great the way it is. And so what's the mix there in Bud Walton Arena? What's the demographics on people sitting in the stands? I'm assuming that most sporting events like that, where it costs a lot of money to go, season tickets, and you know, it's not cheap. I'm assuming that tends to be older fans because they've got more money.
Exactly it. The only sport that really season ticket holders are skew younger is MLS, and we're not talking about any soccer on here.
So, I don't know.
Yeah, well, there's a raging debate about Bud Walton Arena, but as long as you keep winning games, it doesn't really matter what the atmosphere is, right?
That's what really matters.
2-win streak for the Hogs. They'll face South Carolina Tuesday. If you're watching this later in the week and it already happened, we'll see how that game goes. You'll already know. Now, let's switch over and go to some football questions. Razorback wants to know, Razorback with just the Z, we're on Hogville, wants to know, recruiting-wise, can Arkansas compete with Alabama, Georgia A&M, Texas LSU, and Oklahoma? Basically, can they compete with all the big schools?
Yeah, well, he's looking ahead to when those 2 schools, Texas and Oklahoma, come in and wondering, hey, can we compete in recruiting with those schools? I think so. Maybe not right now. But I've always told people that say, and this is a complaint that's been going on for years, Arkansas cannot compete with these schools. They just don't recruit. And it's because these recruiting services have their own way of doing it, and they rank you, and you have 4 stars and 5 stars, and Arkansas ends up somewhere around 28th, 30th, or whatever, depending on the year. And they're like, how can we ever compete? And first of all, the answer to that question is, let's go back to the 60s. A lot of people that aren't my age, or people that are older know this, but people that aren't my age don't remember what the facilities were like around here in the 60s. I've got a picture that I look at sometimes on my computer. It's a picture that was taken right about the summer that I got here in '75, and it's a picture looking at Razorback Stadium from the north end zone parking lot coming down that hill from North Street. And it looks like the most rinky-dink erector set football stadium you've ever seen. I mean, it's just, the first time I saw it, because I'd seen all the bigger stadiums in Texas, even Texas Tech where I grew up, Jones Stadium wasn't huge, but it wasn't a steel structure like that. It was nice. And I looked at that and I went, how do they recruit with this place? In that picture, if you look down all the way past the field, down on the home side, to the south of that, there's a little gray building. You know what that gray building is? That's the visitors' locker room. And they had another one on the other side. Yes, or that was the home locker room. They had another one on the other side for the visitors. And it was just a little dumpy building. And that's where the teams dressed. I mean, Arkansas in the 60s, they had 1 grass practice field and a half. They didn't even have 2 practice fields.
1.5.
And I'm thinking to myself, how did you... Arkansas in the 1960s was the 3rd winningest school in the country. They were number 3 in total wins for the decade. They won a national championship. They came within a few points of winning 2 more. Could have been 3 national championships very easily in that decade. And so you say to yourself, how did they do it? You know how he did it? I've had people tell me. Because his assistant coaches could flat recruit. They knew where to go find players, and they got them. Well, guess what? Sam Pittman does that. We found that out at the end of last season when he got rid of about 3 of his assistants. Not that they were bad coaches. They weren't recruiting the way he wanted them to recruit. This man has been at Georgia. He knows what it's like to land a top 5 recruiting class and what it takes. And so he's not going to accept something less from his own guys. They may not have it there now, but he knows what the process has to be. So Otis Kirk, who's our recruiting guru, and I've known Otis for 30 years.
Best in the biz.
I mean, he's good. And he tells me that this class coming up, we're still 2 or 3 weeks away from signing day, but he says this could end up being the best class since the mid-'90s. So they're already moving up from where they were. If they have more success next year, and I think there's reason to believe they will on the field, they're not that far away from knocking on the top 10. I'm thinking in a couple of years they might have a top 10 recruiting class. Once you get there, then it's just a matter of refining what you're doing. Now the NIL money comes into this, and everybody's scared of that because the perception is right now that Arkansas has kind of this milquetoast NIL thing, which is balanced more toward making sure the players all know that they got to pay their taxes and get the proper agent and have the proper advice, rather than just working out huge NIL deals, whereas A&M supposedly has these millions of dollars they're willing to just throw away and grab guys. And so there's a big debate. We talked about it last week about, are we going to reach a point where NIL money is what governs recruiting? And I don't think necessarily it will. But
against the rules.
I freely admit that right now, because there are very few NIL rules, if it stays this way, it could be a real problem for Arkansas. But I don't think it's going to. I think we're going to get some rules within a year.
And money, you cannot use any money to recruit a kid. He has to sign first. But all that we know can always happen behind closed doors. I was told by somebody very familiar with that there's no question that's been violated. Oh, 100%.
That person told me that the schools have been turned in. The NCAA is already investigating them. So we'll see what happens.
Oh, that's going to take, what, 7 years till we find something out?
I don't know. It's just what he said.
We'll see. We'll see. All right, let's keep on going. Bacon the Saddle again. I love that name. On Hogville says, the football Hogs finished with 4 losses, 3 to top 11 schools and 2 by a combined 8 points on the road. Losses to Ole Miss and Alabama. Are the Razorbacks closer than we think to competing at the highest levels of college football, or deceptively further away than the scores indicate?
I don't think they're farther away. I don't think this is fool's gold this past year. That was a tough schedule. And I mean, they did some pretty amazing things. So I think there's definite proof that this program, after 2 full year, really 1 full year is what they had to going into last year, that they made an amazing improvement in what they were able to do. And one of the biggest, and I've talked about it before, was Kendall Briles' development of KJ Jefferson. Well, KJ's coming back. Kendall Briles is there. You see that improvement continue. I could see this team winning 10 games next year. I'll tell you what's a real big key. Alabama comes here next year. They can't keep beating Arkansas forever. This has been going on since 2004 or 5, 2006. That was the last time.
It's got a crack.
That was the last time Arkansas beat Alabama. Sooner or later, you're going to beat them. So maybe next year is the year.
You're losing a good quarterback if you're Alabama. You're losing receivers if you're Alabama.
Well, here's the thing. A&M, you beat them and you ended that streak. Can you keep it up? Because you're going to have to win that game. If you want to improve, you got to beat them again too. I don't know. Maybe they can. I think A&M will respect them a little more. They'll be a little more fired up. What about Ole Miss? Ole Miss comes here, and they lost their quarterback.
So you could lose their coach. You never know where he'll go.
You don't know what he's going to do. So yeah, you looks like you could win that game. I don't know the what's his name down. Mike Leach down at Mississippi State.
He's in his own world.
You got to go to their place, so that might be tough. But as I look at that schedule, I think there's a chance they could improve. And if you improve even 1 game, you've won 10 games. Now you're getting into rarefied air when you do that. Now, if you improve any more, you're up to 11. Now you're really doing some stuff. So to me, in answer to your question, I don't think they're that far away. I think the opposite of what he's suggesting. I don't think it was fool's gold last year. I think
You think they are close to competing at the high levels?
I think they are. I think they're pretty close.
There you go, Bacon. Close. We'll see. That recruiting class only going to help. We have more news on that on our website, too. They just landed a transfer quarterback, according to our Otis Kirk. All right. Alex for Hogs, 88, asks on Hogville, on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried should we be about Kendall Briles going to Miami as their offensive coordinator? Starting to get a little antsy the longer that position remains open. Would hate to lose him, but definitely trust the pit boss for naming the replacement if necessary. This kind of whirlwind of Briles has been going on since the end of the season.
And with Miami, it's because they haven't named any, or at least they haven't as of.
Yeah, the rumors of like that Oregon guy maybe.
Yeah. So they just hired away Ole Miss's running backs coach, and I read a big story on that. And it sounds like that was their big priority staff hire. In other words, the new head coaching staff, they're going to emphasize running the ball more there. So maybe that wouldn't attract Briles anyway. But as you said, I'm not even sure he's their number one candidate. The reason some people were worried is he'd been at Florida State, and they're thinking maybe this guy likes Florida. Oh, fans come up with all kinds of things. He was at Florida State. He likes Florida. Oh, this is Miami.
Warm weather and palm trees.
So I've said this before. I mean, look, we don't have contact with these assistant coaches. I mean, Sam Pittman has this policy. We don't talk to them in season. I'm thinking that after maybe on signing day, I think this is what happened last year. On signing day, we were able to sit down with all of them and talk about recruiting and then different things like that. So this is where you kind of ask them about things like your future and how do you like it here and all of that. So I don't get a feel for how solid he is for being here, but I've just told people I just have a feeling that if he leaves here, it's going to be for a head coaching job. And I think he's really bought into kind of developing K.J. Jefferson. If he gets that guy, I mean, I'm not saying he's going to win the Heisman. Arkansas would probably have to win the SEC for that to happen. But he's pretty close to that. And if he develops him into something like that, that really helps him.
Right.
So,
yeah, and
Briles has got reasons to stay here.
Yeah, I mean, no disrespect to Briles. I think it takes another year to prove a head coaching position would be your next step.
Right.
You know, especially because you want to go to a major program. You don't want to.
Yeah, it could be.
You go to some community college and be a head coach, you know?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Portal questions now. Here we go, because it's always the hot topic. All right. Questions and comments continue from last week. Old Hog on Hogville says, when a coach leaves for another team, there is a buyout. When a player voluntarily enters the portal, say Mike Woods last year, going to Oklahoma, and signs with another team, should the gaining team have to pay compensation, maybe one scholarship, to the losing team? Well, that's really, I've never thought of it that way. They come up with these
interesting questions, and it is an interesting thing. It's not going to happen, I promise you. But that would not be, based on what I know about the portal right now, that would not help Arkansas. Because here's what happens. They've gotten rid of about 10 guys at least. And they didn't just say beat it, but it was like, hey, you know, you're probably not going to play a lot here. You might want to, if you want to develop, you might want to go somewhere else.
Right.
So you're asking guys to kind of leave. You're kind of encouraging them. Well, if you have to give up scholarships to do that, they're not going to do that.
No, it's enticing people to kick kids off teams in a sense if they want to have a scholarship.
Well, if you had to give up a scholarship every time you ask somebody to transfer, would you ask somebody that you know, I mean, you're going to tell a guy that's not going to play, go away and go to another school, but we're going to give your scholarship to that school?
Yeah, and then what if they go to a team in your conference? Then you're like, oh, now we have to give the Aggies a scholarship.
Exactly. So, and the way it's worked out now, it probably wouldn't matter. It's kind of even Steven on good players, but I'm telling you, the numbers right now, Arkansas has lost a bunch of guys in the portal. Is what was causing the freak out last week because there were like 13 or 14 of these guys, and most of them were players that they sort of encouraged to leave. So I can't see that it would be good that they had to give up a scholarship for each one of these. You'd be down 13 scholarships.
That would just add so much more to what already is a crazy free agency of the transfer portal. Yeah,
so
I
it's
agree.
An interesting idea, but I don't think Sam Pittman would go for it.
No, because then all of a sudden you're throwing NIL money on top of that, and it just gets even more shady. I wouldn't know how to even handle that if that were to be it. All right, Mike _E has another suggestion on Hogville. He says, how big of an uproar would it cause if the NCAA were to require that any school that accepted a player from the portal be required to keep them for at least 2 years? And if they didn't, for any reason, they would lose that scholarship until the 2 years were up. That's kind of an interesting question to entice
another
kids to
interesting one.
stay.
This is a punishment rule. I'm assuming that what a rule like that would be for is to protect a player from we all know that it's supposed to be the player contacts the school first. But let's say that through an intermediary, some coach looks at a player at another school and says, boy, we could really use him here next year. So the word goes to that player. Then he calls them and they start telling him, yeah, blah, 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 this is really good. So he goes there. And then he gets there and they all kind of look at him and go, oh, he's not what we thought he was.
Yeah, you lock in the player then.
So this would force them to stay, to not just run him off. But here's what I think most fans at Arkansas, and I think a lot of fans around the country would say about a rule like that. If a guy wants to transfer, that's his problem. If he transfers into a worse situation, buddy, you just screwed up. Be careful. That's why you should be careful when you transfer. And you could do a Mike Woods situation. He didn't better himself by going to Oklahoma. I think he would have been better off here. I mean, he would have had the bowl game to himself because Traylon Burks is gone.
That's 100% right.
And instead, he goes over there and has about 400 or 500 yards receiving, but I don't think he helped his NFL cause any, and he left for another school. So now he didn't get run off or anything, but this rule would just kind of prevent a school from telling you after you got there, you're not what we thought you were, beat it.
Yeah, it seems like then you would lock in the player had a bad experience year one, then you're just forcing him to have another year of a bad experience.
He might want to leave on his own, and then they might tell him, no, you can't leave.
Yeah, you physically have to stay. It's against the rules.
Or they would fight it or something.
There will be rule changes, just who knows what they will be in the future as we continue to figure out what portal and NIL does.
Really
these are two crazy ideas I've never even thought of before today.
Interesting, though.
They are. So keep up coming your suggestions. I'd love to hear what else you guys think is where the portal will go in terms of rulings. All right. Referring to last week's freakout over Arkansas losing 2 starters to LSU in the portal, that's Greg Brooks Jr. and Joe Fouché. Slobber Slob on Hogville says, a pair of 5 stars, a couple of 4 stars, everyone is right. The portal is killing us. How are we going to survive this kind of success?
Well, this is what we were talking about last week when I said Sam Pittman said before they left for the bowl game, we're going to have a lot of transfers. There are going to be some things that fans will kind of get concerned about, but when this thing all shakes out, we're going to be just fine. Now, what's just fine? Well, this news over the last, they already knew that they had a 4-star defensive lineman from LSU. They already knew that they had a 5-star receiver coming in from Oklahoma. This week, they added a 5-star linebacker from Alabama and a 4-star safety or 4-star cornerback from LSU. So, like he said, you ended up with 2 4-stars and 2 5-stars. And yet last week, everyone was like, oh, we lost these 2 starters to LSU. What are we going to do?
Bring in 2 more starters.
And then the funny part was it was all supposedly because of NIL money. Arkansas didn't have any NIL money, and LSU had a bunch of it. And we were going to be doomed because – and then they somehow tied all that into those other guys that left that they sort of wanted to leave. So the rumors just went nuts. It was like rumors in a small town that just spread like wildfire. And now here we are a week later, and it all kind of
works out.
It settles down just like Sam Pittman said.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, you would have had Greg Brooks and Joe Fouché for 1 more year. Now you open up scholarships, and you got to remember, you can bring people in that can fill those that might have 2 years of 3 years of eligibility that you might go, oh man, we made our money on the back end now. This is looking good, and so far it is. For all of those transfer stories, you can visit our website right now, nwahomepage.com. Click under the Pig Trail Nation tab. We'll have all those for you from our Otis Kirk. As we're winding down, Mike, let's turn to NIL and all of that money that we've been talking about so far. Big Hoggard on Hogville wants to know, do you think new recruits now value NIL money over a school's ability of winning a title when deciding which school to attend?
To a certain extent. I think the schools that have NIL money are also going to be the schools that can have a chance to win titles. Okay.
I think you're right.
So I don't think there's a lot of this, what do I do? But I will say this, because I'm referring back to this A&M thing where they supposedly have $30 million to throw around of NIL money, where Arkansas has one.
One.
Here's what I would say. I don't think if you're a guy that's being recruited by, and we'll see if this happens, but I don't think if you're a guy that's being recruited by A&M and Alabama, that the kid's going to go to A&M because they offer him more money than Alabama. I still think Alabama wants you and you're a 5-star and you want to win championships. The problem is you can't just buy these things. People think you can, but you can't. What Alabama has, they've always had great recruits. But so is A&M, so is Texas, so is a lot of schools have really good recruits. I would dare say that Texas, the University of Texas, recruits right there with Alabama every year. Why are they terrible? Because they don't have coaches. And they got players that come in there entitled and they go, I'm a 5-star, man. You got to play me. And you go to Alabama and play for Nick Saban, and you tell him you're a 5-star and you got to play him, he goes, go sit down over there.
Yeah, we'll bring another 5-star.
We'll play you in 2 years and you can transfer. You can go somewhere else. Because that's what coaching does. And so I still think when it comes right down to it, more of these players are going to go, I'm going to this school because they win. And yeah, that school probably is going to have some good NIL money too, but I don't think they're going to do what the suggestion is. Well, if I go to A&M, I can get a $200,000 deal. If I go to Alabama, I can only get $100,000. I'll go to A&M. I don't think that's going to happen.
No,
if it does, I think you're dealing with somebody that's.
Look at the top cornerback in all of the nation a few months ago committed to Jackson State with Deion Sanders.
Well, there's
some of that. Get coached to be by the best to be the best.
That's some of that. To me, that's a kid that thinks he's going to be out, by the end of his
3 years or whatever,
three and done in football. And so he go make a lot of money for 3 years and figures he's still going to the NFL, and he doesn't really care about winning big championships like if he went to Florida State or somewhere. And I agree that there are some guys like that. I just think most of them aren't that way.
Yeah, I think you're right, too. And also,
I point to K.J. Jefferson. I said this last week. I was told that he has one of the lowest NIL deals, that Lucas Coley, the backup quarterback, has a better NIL deal than he does.
Really?
Because it's not a priority for K.J. He doesn't push it. So
that's interesting. I would have never guessed that.
Well, you have to, if you're doing this right, you have to go out and do this on your own. You don't just
That's true, too. That's true, too.
You have an advisor. Now, obviously, at some schools like A&M, they're going to throw this at you as soon as you walk in the door. Yeah, here's your big deal. We've got it all mapped out here. You have this option, this option, and this option.
Sign here.
But it just goes to show what I'm trying to say is there are players that they're looking more at the NFL and with the kind of money they can make than some money for 2 or 3 years, and then I don't go to the NFL because I didn't go to the right school. That sort of thing.
Long-term investment, smart for anybody to know about. A lot of those people are the safest with their money. So shout out to K.J. Jefferson, playing the long game. I like to hear it. All right, that'll wrap up this week's Ask Mike. Send us more of your questions. We'll answer them right back here next Monday.